Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our talk, bright and early. And thank you to everyone who's watching this on YouTube because they had a little too much fun last night. So we're here to talk to you today about cloud audit logs and using them to manage your insider risk. About us, we're both product managers on Google Cloud. My name is Marie Cosgrove-Davies, and I work on Stackdriver with a focus on logging.
And my name is Joseph Valente, and I work on security with a focus on logging.
And we work together quite a lot at the intersection of security and logging, which is audit logs. We'll be showing you Stackdriver today, so a little bit of an intro on Stackdriver. It's a SaaS ops suite from Google, used by app devs and operators to monitor and troubleshoot their applications on GCP, on AWS, and on-prem. And our mission at Stackdriver is to help developers and operators keep hybrid and multi-cloud apps fast and available. Stackdriver has a number of components, including an APM suite made up of trace, debug, and profiler, as well as an error reporting tool. What we'll be focusing on today are the monitoring and logging portions of the Stackdriver platform. And we'll specifically be talking about audit logs, like it says in the subject of the talk. There are three types of audit logs that we may be discussing, or will be discussing. The first is admin activity audit logs. Now, these are always on and always free for the GCP services that produce them, and they tell you about the creation and deletion of resources. The second type of audit logs is data access audit logs. These logs tell you about data reading and writing, and you must turn them on. If you think about your usage of the cloud, you read and write data a lot more than you create and delete resources. So these logs may be very high volume, and we'll talk a little bit about how to manage that volume. And the third type of audit logs is access transparency logs. And these tell you when Google support or Google engineers access your resources. These logs must also be turned on, and they're available to Platinum and Gold customers. Just a little note on retention. Admin activity audit logs are retained for 400 days. Data access and access transparency audit logs are retained for 30 days. And we'll show you how to set up longer-term storage for your logs as part of this talk. So what are we going to cover today? We know that managing insider risk requires more than great logging, but you can't manage insider risk effectively without having a functional and effective logging solution. So we're going to help you with that building block. We'll go through the basics of how to use audit logging. We'll go through some practical tips and more advanced use cases on using audit logging on GCP. And we'll do it all in the framework of a case study of a group that used audit logs to effectively manage their security on GCP. And so here's our real-world example. These are my cats. And they have two hobbies. Hobby number one is napping. And hobby number two is being admired. And pretty recently, I stopped working from home and I started working from an office, and suddenly their admiration supply dwindled because I wasn't looking at them all day and telling them how cute they were. So they knew they had to go seek more admiration. And these are pretty business-savvy cats. They're very up on new technologies. So they decided to start a cat photos website on GCP. As with any startup, each of the cats had a special role. Hollis was the cat executive officer. Acorn was the cat marketing officer. And Ash, who's the most tech-savvy of the three, is the cat technology officer. Now, as the CTO, Ash is the one making most of the decisions around security and technology, so we'll be following her today. And Joe is going to tell you about starting on GCP and Ash's exploration of the admin activity audit logs.
Thanks, Marie.
Demo, please.
Thanks. So we're going to jump into our Google Cloud Platform console. And now, Marie has a lot of confidence in her cats, but they are cats. So we just want to make sure that everything's been set up properly here. So we're in our Cat Entrepreneurs project, which is the project that the cats created to run their website on GCP. And we're going to jump into our logging console here in Stackdriver logging. Now, admin activity audit logs are on by default for all services that produce them. What does this mean? It means that if you create or delete a resource, for example, a GCS bucket, we'll automatically create a log of that for you and store it for free for 400 days. Those logs can't be deleted So if someone inside your company is trying to cover up something that happened at work by deleting the log, that won't be possible. So let's go ahead and select the GCS bucket, and we'll go ahead and select the admin activity logs for that bucket. I'm going to go ahead and select all of the admin activity logs going back over time. Now, what I can see here, this is how you know it's real, is that like it's taking a little bit to load. What I can see here is that I've got a list of all of the creates and deletes that happen to my resources on GCP. I can see who did them. I can dive in here and expand these all to see a little bit more information. Now, I want to stress that while you do get the admin activity logs for write activity, things like creates, deletes, updates, you don't actually get admin activity logs for reads in respect of your admin metadata. What that means is if someone goes ahead and reads the access control list on a GCS bucket, you won't automatically get an admin activity log of that. You'll need to turn those on separately, and we'll cover how to do that in the second section of this talk. But what you will get is if someone deletes a bucket, you'll automatically get the log of that, and you don't need to turn those on. And as you can see here, we get a bunch of information that's useful for auditing what happened in this particular action. So I can see that it was Marie who did the activity. There's an audit log created, and she had permission granted from this permission, and this was the action that she did and the IP that she did it from. So that's admin activity audit logs. And now we'll cut back to Marie, who's going to talk a little bit more before we go into detail on how we can turn on other types of logs.
All right, so it turned out that cat photos on the internet were a hugely underserved market. The cats are business geniuses, and so they need to scale their business. They have to hire. And they look around and they find this great engineer. His name is Sherlock. You can see him right here. He has a lot of experience in the cloud, but he's new to GCP. So he's learning. And what Ash realized is that as they're scaling the business, this is the right time to make sure they have all of their security set up so that they're logging everything they need. They have their long-term log storage set up, just to make sure that in case of anything happening, they were prepared to deal with it. And Joe's going to show you how that happened.
Awesome. Thanks, Marie. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about enabling data access and admin read audit logs and exports.
Can we go? Yes, perfect.
So we're going to jump back to the demo. So I'm back in my Google Cloud console on my home page. If I head to the navigation menu and I scroll down to the IAM and admin section, I can see that there's an option to select audit logs. If I jump in here, I'm going to zoom out a little bit because of the resolution on the screen. Hopefully you can all still see that. Yes, great. So what can I see here? These are all the services that I've enabled on Google Cloud Platform. So I'm using sort of Cloud Data Store API as an example, or I'm using Cloud Key Management Service. Now, I can scroll through this list and I can see all of the services that I have enabled, and I can individually configure my audit logging for each one. So I'm going to go ahead and select this Cloud Composer API, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on those admin read audit logs that I was talking about before. So those are going to give me the read activity of all the administrative related metadata on this service. So if someone read an access control list, I'll now get an audit log of that. What about data reads and data writes? I can go ahead and turn those on too. So these will now generate audit logs whenever someone accesses or writes data to the resources that are inside the service. So to use Google Cloud Storage as an example again, I would now get an audit log every time someone reads or writes to a bucket on GCS.
And now you remember that we said that these might be pretty high volume logs. So Joe's going to show you how to mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah, so you're probably thinking at this point, reading and writing from a storage bucket on GCS or from a database is going to generate a ton of logs. I mean, a lot of you would run production systems that face millions of users, and every time each one of those users does an action, it's probably going to read from maybe one, if not more, data stores on GCP. And so, as you can imagine, the logs pile up very, very quickly. And so what you may want to do is use the exempted users functionality to stop automated accesses to that data. So this is usually things like service accounts or other accounts that on a regular basis talk to other services that are lower level inside GCP. One example is you may have a production front end that has a service account that talks to a database on the back end and is regularly pulling data out of there and generating a ton of data access audit logs. You may not be as interested in this activity because it's not a human actor. So it's not someone from inside your company who's going and changing and deleting resources. It's just the sort of functioning of your app in general. And you may prefer to have like other analytics in place that are sort of less heavy duty that collect the information to do with this stuff. So what you can do here is you can click this Add Exempted User button, and you can insert the name of whether it's a person or a service account into this box, and you can exempt them from certain log types. I'm not going to go ahead and enable this just now, but what I will say is that you should be careful when you use this feature. And the reason is that if you add an exempted user to this box, they won't generate audit logs. And so you need to make sure that you have appropriate security controls in respect of that user. For example, you have a service account. You know that it generates a lot of audit logs. And so you say, I'll add it to the exempted users list. You add it to the exempted users list. But all the people who work for your company have access to that service account and can grab the credentials for it and SSH into it and do whatever they want. So now what you've done is you've created a situation where lots of people can go ahead and do things with the service account that won't be logged. So we have a couple of other talks on securing service accounts you can look up on YouTube that happened yesterday. And you can find out more about how we've got security features in place that help you secure those accounts. And we've just released recently at GCP Next a new feature called binary authorization that also helps around securing service accounts. But I'll let you guys look that up in your own spare time. So I want to click on this button here that says default audit config as well, and I want to talk a little bit about this. You're probably thinking there's a huge list of services here. What happens if, I configure this on Monday, and then on Tuesday someone goes and starts using a bunch of new other services that I didn't configure audit logging for? Do I have to just keep going back and configuring new audit logs for those services? And for that, we've created this feature called the default audit config. So you can click on this button at the top. It's going to send you to this page. This essentially allows you to configure audit logging for all the services. So even when a person starts using a service you've never configured before, you can just select this default audit config, save it, and then that service will automatically have those logs enabled when people start using it. So you can see here, there's a tooltip that says these logs are enabled as part of the default audit config. So that's a useful feature as well. The last thing I want to touch on that I won't demonstrate is organization level audit logging. So the configurations for audit logging obey the inheritance of our IAM system. So if you create an audit logging config at an organization level, and you say everything in my organization, log everything for every service, that will be inherited down by the projects. And so you'll see a tick here that says these logs have been enabled as part of the organization level config. So that's available to you as well. You'll need to do that using our APIs. You'll need to pull down the IAM config for the organization and enable it there. So that is how we enable data access and admin read audit logs on GCP. And now I'm going to jump to Stackdriver logging and show you a little bit what we can do with those.
So one other thing Ash wanted to make sure she set up was exports. Because as we mentioned, your admin activity logs are retained for 400 days, but your other audit logs are retained for 30 days. So if you want to keep them or you need to keep them for compliance reasons, you can export them to GCS for long-term storage or to BigQuery if you want to keep track of them. And so Joe's going to show us how that happens.
Great. So I'm back in Stackdriver logging, and I can see now I've selected this data access type of audit logs, and I can see all the data access operations that are happening in respect to this, in respect to this bucket. So there's a bunch of list operations. Those are when someone says, fetch me a list of all the files that are in this bucket, you'll get an audit log of the list operation. And I can see that there have been different people who have been doing that at my company. So as Marie said, we're only going to hold on to these audit logs for 30 days. You're going to want to do a whole lot of things with these audit logs. You're going to want to use them in other tools that you have set up and other processes inside your business. You're going to want to export them because you want to store them for longer than 30 days in somewhere that's a bit cheaper. So we've got this export feature inside Stackdriver logging that allows us to do that. You can just hit this Create Export button at the top, and it will export whatever you have in this filter here. So right now I'm exporting all the GCS bucket logs that are of the data access type. But I'm actually going to want to export all of my GCS bucket logs. So I'll change the filter, and my export will now work off this new filter. So in order to do this, we need to create what's called a sink. So this sink is like the point of integration with Stackdriver logging. So I'm just going to call it sink. I'm not a very creative person. So I'm going to export into a service, and we support 3 different exports. The first one is BigQuery. Why would you want to use BigQuery to analyze your logs? So as you can see here in Stackdriver logging, we've got a pretty robust user interface that you can use to analyze the logs. We showed before about how you can click through, you can do sort of searches and filters up here at the top. Where BigQuery becomes useful is if you want to join multiple data sources together. So you may have a data source that has the organizational chart, for example, of the people at your company. Or you may have a data source that has a list of sort of metadata fields for each of the data sources at your company that specifies like what is sort of high sensitivity versus low sensitivity. Whatever that may be. You may have these different data sources and you want to draw them all together. And you want to run a query that says, show me everything that people who work in my reliability engineering team who have access to the user data inside my company have done in the last 30 days. You can run that sort of query in BigQuery very, very easily. So that's why you might want to export your logs into BigQuery. Cloud storage. So this is the second type of export that we can set up. Cloud storage is very useful for storing logs for a long period of time for archival purposes. So once we have this sync set up, it's going to start drawing all the audit logs out of our Stackdriver logging console and into cloud storage as a copy. As Marie said, the data access audit logs are only stored for 30 days, whereas once they're in cloud storage, they just sit there, and you just pay the cloud storage rates, which are very, very cheap for storing this kind of data. So once you have them in cloud storage, we're going to touch a little bit later on some security features you can enable there to make sure that people can't just go in and delete the logs very easily. But you can essentially set them there, and it's one less thing you need to worry about. You'll have all of your logs backed up to a cheap location, and then if, hopefully this doesn't happen, but if an incident happens down the track, and you discover that something happened 2 months ago, or 10 months ago, or a year ago, you can just go, hit that cloud storage bucket, pull up the copy of your logs, and perform any forensics that you need to. One thing that a lot of people do is they may store it in the cloud storage bucket, and then, if you need to do advanced analysis of these logs, grab them from cloud storage, throw them into BigQuery, and then do the analysis you need to do there. And then finally, we've got Cloud PubSub. Cloud PubSub is really useful if you have a tool that you might use regularly, like a SIM tool or similar, that you have on site, and it's collecting, let's say, all the logs from your on-premise environment, all the logs from your other cloud services, and the logs from GCP that you might be using. And you just want to pipe your audit logs directly into that tool because you don't want to have to set up a new process. You just want to sort of bolt it onto your existing process. That's where Cloud PubSub is super useful. So you create a Cloud PubSub sync, we grab a topic, and you can subscribe to that topic from your other tool, and every time a new event's created, it'll just pull it into that new tool, and you don't have to worry about it. So that's exports, and they're a fairly useful and powerful feature that we support inside Stackdriver logging. We'll talk a little bit more about them later on in the deck, but I'll just hand it back to Marie now so we can talk a little bit about some other stuff.
All right. So now as many of you know, you're on call. And Ash is also on call as one of the 2 engineers currently on the team. And one day a page woke her up from a nap. The photos on the cat website weren't rendering, and that's their main business, so it's a pretty big problem. And so she went to the GCP console to investigate. Now, Ash knows that naming is one of the hardest things in software, and she's solved the problem. So all of the photos are in a Google Cloud Storage bucket that's called Very Important Bucket. Can we go back to the demo, please? Thank you.
Highly secure name.
Highly secure. So if we go into Google Cloud Storage, her first step is going to be looking to see if the bucket's there. And it looks like it's not. Now, if she didn't know about audit logs, she wouldn't really be able to troubleshoot. But since she does, since she's now very well versed in audit logs, she's going to go into logging. And she's going to take a look at these GCS bucket audit logs. And we're specifically concerned with the admin activity audit logs, because that's where a deletion would show up. So it looks like there was a delete operation on our very important bucket by Sherlock, who's still learning how to use GCS. So he must have accidentally deleted the most important bucket for the cats. And now, since there's no alerting setups to their chat channel or email alert set up, he didn't realize it was a problem. Ash got paged. So there are a couple things that Ash is going to want to do. First, she may want to set up an alert to let her know via chat or via email or even a page if this bucket is removed again. And second, she might want to see if there's anything else that Sherlock might have done accidentally because he's still learning the platform. So let's do that second one first. And if we click on this, we'll be able to show matching entries. And you'll see that our search field has expanded from a single line to our more advanced search. What we really want to look for here is, we'll remove the GCS bucket because we want to look at all of the activity that Sherlock has been doing. And a lot of creation and deletion, but also this one set IAM policy, which is a little suspicious. So we can go down and see who Sherlock's been giving access to. Let's see, he gave Cloud Functions access and Dataproc access, all this access. To whom? Oh my gosh, to sneakyspycat@gmail.com. He must have been phished. He's still learning. It's okay. But this is something else that Ash might want to set up an alert for. So if we want to set up, for instance, an alert for deleting our very important bucket, we're going to do the same show matching entries. So we're searching for delete, searching for very important bucket. Going to remove Sherlock, because anyone might delete this bucket. And so now we've got our logs, we have our filter set up, and what we're going to do is create a metric that will allow us to alert on this problem through Stackdriver monitoring. And gosh, lots of people have been deleting this bucket. Who would do that? Okay, so we will call this very important bucket actions. We'll actually make it a new one. And we'll go ahead and create that metric. So now if we go over to our Stackdriver monitoring, we can go into alerting, and we can create a policy based on this metric that we just defined. So we'll add our condition. We want a metric threshold. So we'll select that. And because I work on Stackdriver, I know that these metrics are going to be called logging/user. So all of what are called log-based metrics in Stackdriver will show up in Stackdriver monitoring as logging/user, and then the name of the policy, or the metric, excuse me. So we're looking for a very important bucket deletion. And what we want to do is alert if this is above 0. Now, there's no data available for the selected time frame because I just created this metric, and no one's deleted the bucket since, so that's good. So I'll go ahead and save this. I will add an email notification to cattechnologyofficer@gmail.com, which shockingly was available when I added it for this demo. And then we'll name it, very important bucket is gone. All right. And so now, I'm not going to go ahead and create and delete the bucket, but if I did, this is what my alert would look like in Ash's email. So it'll tell me what happened, and it'll give me a link to the Cloud Console to go investigate. OK. So now Ash is starting to set up a lot of different alerts on various security things. And what she quickly realized is that all of these alerts are really digging into her napping time. Remember, the cat's two favorite things are napping and being admired. And this website is covering the admiration, but like napping is tricky now. So what the cats really need to do is to automate their security. They have to start seeing what the common problems are and how they're consistently solving them, and then writing some automation to handle those so they can stick to napping. And so this is what Ash did, and this is a simple example of how to automate some of your security using Cloud Functions. So Joe told us a little bit about setting up syncs, and in this case, Ash has noticed that everyone's supposed to apply a label to all of their prod machines when they spin them up, but that's a really hard thing to remember how to do. So she wants to automate it so she can stop going back and adding them post-emptively. So the first thing is to go to the logs browser, and she's going to define a filter. And actually, I've got a pre-baked cake in the oven that is an export, so I will just show you the filter we've already defined. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell us about when we have a new VM in Compute Engine. So it is an admin activity log, that's what the top line is. And we're inserting a Compute Engine instance. And anything goes here. And we've called this audit log new instance, and it's a cloud pub/sub topic. And so every time we create a new VM in cloud GCE, excuse me, we'll get a message to the pub/sub topic, and we will trigger our cloud function. So if we go over to Cloud Functions, we've got this function called add label to new VMs, and it's looking at the audit log new instance topic. And if we take a look at it, nothing has happened lately, but we can see the trigger type is cloud pub/sub. The topic is audit log new instance. And you can't view the source, but I swear this will add the label envprod to a new VM. And so let's go take a look at that and see if it works.
We copied the source directly from Stack Overflow, didn't we?
So we'll create a new instance. It will be called instance 7 because, again, we are very good at naming. We'll make it super tiny and create. So if I take a look at this instance right now, then I would expect it to have no labels, if I can load it. Welcome to live demos. There we go. Oh, it already applied. Anyway, if I had managed to open it before my very quick cloud function applied, we would have seen labels none. But now the cloud function has kicked in. It's applied this envprod label, and the cats have managed to automate away this task that was taking them 10 minutes of napping time a day. So that's a lot more napping, all told. And this is just a very simple example of a really powerful and complex capability that you have with audit logs, which is you can automate all sorts of challenges or security or non-security related. Can we go back to the deck, please? So what else might you want to automate using these? Oh, we're missing a slide. Oh, well. So you might want to automate something like checking to see if new users are part of your org and removing their ability to do anything if they're not. You might want to automate adding firewall rules to new VMs. This is a super powerful tool that you have available. So now that the cats have automated their security, they're able to nap, they're able to be admired, and they know their site's secure. So it's a really happy ending, which I don't know how many of you work in security, but these are really rare in the security space. So everything is great. And now Joe's going to tell you a little more.
Thanks, Marie. So everyone loves napping. Everyone loves getting admiration. In order to do that, obviously, we need to keep powering up our security practices to free up our time to allow us to do that. So today we've covered audit logs. We've covered how important they are as part of your security strategy. One thing we have had a few of is sometimes we get a frantic call from a customer saying, help, something's happened and I don't have data access audit logs on. Is there any way you can recover the data access audit logs that would have been generated 60 days ago? And unfortunately, the answer is no. So the audit logs get generated when you turn them on. And so you need to make sure that you have these on in advance. It is a little bit of work, as we saw before. It takes a few minutes, but the investment is well worth it. You get them set up ahead of time. You have a process where you're storing them and archiving them, and it's a really great insurance policy in the case that something does happen and you just need that extra information. The other one is having teams and processes in place. So it helps to have great tooling. It helps to have people who are trained to use it. And if you don't already have that in place, you should get that set up. Auditing things on a regular basis and clearing through them with an established process is a lot easier than going back later on and trying to set it all up at once when you've realized that something is amiss. And finally, maturing only once you've automated. So you don't want to go ahead and start automating everything well ahead of time because you think it's going to be a problem. See how you go first, see what you're doing repetitively, and then invest the time into automating that. So we also wanted to talk a little bit about compliance with audit logging as well. Obviously, using audit logs for security reasons is a big use case, but you may have a compliance standard or your own internal policies that you need to comply with as well. So what can you do to make compliance super easy using audit logs? The first one is using aggregated exports, and we'll dive into exactly how this works later. But aggregated exports allow you to export all the audit logs for all your projects in your organization into a bucket. And that's going to be really useful if you need to archive them for a long period of time. Like we said before, GCS is very cheap, great way to archive your logs, and they've just announced a new bucket lock feature that can give you some additional security over to make sure the logs are even more tamper-proof than they were before. You should obviously have them in a GCS bucket that has a really strict security policy on it. You don't want to have it so that anyone can access the bucket. But the bucket lock feature gives you additional sort of security features that allow you to lock it down even further. You can read more about that on the GCS documentation. So aggregated exports. What are these and why would we want to do them? So an aggregated export is where you export all the logs for all the projects in your organization. New projects get automatically included. There's a command here. We won't run this because if we run it, it'll do an aggregated export of every single project at Google, and that'll just set the data center on fire. But what you can do is you can run your own version of this aggregated export on your own GCP organization.
And we do have really detailed docs on aggregated exports and how they work. So if you search for aggregated exports, Google, Stackdriver, you'll turn those up. This is a really common request we get from users is, how do I make sure that new projects are covered in my audit log exports? And so we wanted to make sure we covered it.
Yeah. So head to your favorite search engine. I'm not going to suggest which one, but type in aggregated exports, Stackdriver logging, and there's a full guide on how you can set it up. The query we have here is just an example, so obviously it's not going to work on your own project, but it's just a gcloud command that you can use from the SDK. That'll set up the Stackdriver automated aggregated exports for this org, and you'll get it all into a bucket. The last thing we wanted to touch on was access transparency logs. So we did touch on these a little bit at the start. These are these logs that you're going to get if support access your information for whatever reason. These are only available on GCP. They're only available to Platinum and Gold customers. And they give you basically visibility all the way down the stack to like even things that engineering are doing. So it just gives you, again, plugging that sort of last frontier of gaps that exist over on the cloud provider side. Audit logs are great for covering things that happen inside your own org. But if someone calls up support and says to support, hey, I'd like help because I can't access what's in this bucket, this will make sure that if support read the access control list on that bucket, you'll get an audit log of that. So let's just dive into this. We've got an example access transparency log here, I'm going to just zoom in to each of these bits so we can sort of talk through what's inside each of them. So at the top, you obviously get the type. You can see it's an access transparency log. You get a little bit of information about the person making the access. You can see it was a person who's usually located in Canada, but right now they're in the US and they work for Google LLC. You get some information about what happened. So here, someone read the access control list on the bucket. We obviously have tooling that stops support from sort of reading what's in the bucket, but even if they read something as small as like a label on a VM or the name of a VM or the access control list on a bucket, you will get a log of all of that stuff. And then finally, the reason why that happened. So you can see here that you open up a support ticket, case number bar123. You can go ahead and grab that support ticket, read everything that happened in it, and think, yep, this is kind of what I would expect. I was having trouble accessing what was in the bucket, and the support tech went and checked the access control list to see if I had appropriate permissions. So these are useful. You can grab them. They work exactly the same as all the other logs in Stackdriver logging. So all the things we've just covered today around setting up alerts, setting up monitoring, those are all covered. You can use these as part of an automation suite with Google Cloud Functions. Highly encourage you, if you have Platinum or Gold support, to get these set up, and you can start using them today. So if you want to learn more about audit logs, just Google GCP Cloud Audit Logging. Super easy way to find all of our documentation. We've got some pretty extensive documentation there, and we have some other webinars that are on the web as well that you can watch. Or you can catch up on this talk if you're not already. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.